Thanks. As Elaine just reported, insurgents in Iraq monitoring video feeds from Predator drones would know exactly what is under surveillance. It could give them enough information to avoid attacks from U.S. forces. Well, just how much of a victory is this for insurgent forces? Joining me now to talk more about this, national security expert Gabriel Schoenfeld. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and CNN senior international correspondent Nick Robertson. Gabriel, let's start with you. What does it say about U.S. national security that a $26 software program can download the video feeds from these drones?
It shows a certain degree of complacency in our Pentagon, because this became the theoretical flow was known to them as far back as the 1990s. They assumed that local forces, as the Wall Street Journal reported, would not be able to do this. That assumption was wrong, and it did probably cost us intelligence over the last year, as long as they're hacking into these systems.
You know, terrorists certainly have gotten a lot better at using the internet. You know, we see that with Al-Qaeda, these messages from bin Laden that are coming out. Al-Qaeda's got its own website, its own production facility. I mean, to not assume that they would be capable of doing this when the flaw was discovered, as you said, 10 years ago in Bosnia.
That's right. And this is a $26 piece of software that's being used by relatively unsophisticated forces. What happens when a state uses its resources to try and break into our communications networks? If we're complacent in this way about these low-tech things, are we doing well against the high-tech threat? I wonder about that, and it's one of the questions raised by this report.
You know, Nick Robertson, this software was designed to pull movies and satellite radio down off of satellites that are flying so high up there above the Earth in space. It seems to work very well, as we found out, for pulling down anything that comes off the satellites, including military feeds. And it's not only just Predator video that's coming down. There's lots of other things that the military is bouncing off of those satellites, isn't there?
Well, one of the things that the drone offered the Air Force and the U.S. military in general is the fact that they were relatively cheap to build, and the design time was very short compared to an F-35, which took decades to get ready, cost billions of dollars in research. You don't have that with the drone. But what happens is you're buying off-the-shelf components, and when you buy off-the-shelf components and you don't harden them in security terms, encrypt them, if you will, then it does make them vulnerable. And there have been many examples, as we've just heard, where this has been done in the past. So the military was fully cognizant of this when it was rushing these, as it still is, rushing them into service. Obviously, those drones operating over Pakistan are not beaming signals down to troops on the ground, but where they've been used in Iraq and Afghanistan, that's what they're doing, and that's where the intercepts are coming, putting those soldiers who are fighting the battles physically on the ground, putting them in harm's way.
Yeah, and you've spent a lot of time in both Afghanistan and Iraq, Nick. When I say that there's a lot more information coming down off of the satellites than just the drones looking for terrorists. I mean, aren't they conducting video surveillance for troops on the ground as well as they're moving through certain areas?
You know, if you're a soldier on the ground and you've got a UAV above you, you feel good. I mean, we've talked to troops out there, and they feel good. You've been there too. They feel good because they know there are eyes on them that are watching out for insurgents in buildings on the road ahead. Imagine knowing now that the insurgents in the building ahead may be watching you coming towards them. You thought you had the advantage, and now you're in their gun sights. It's not clear entirely here exactly are the insurgents using a little satellite dish, are they using a radio antenna, because it's those signals that are designed to go down to the troops on the ground are the ones that are being interrupted. Of course, wholly different to taking control of UAVs and drones, which is what nation states would do. When we focus on drones this summer, the Air Force told us they were trying to develop them so that other governments couldn't take control of them, so that the drones could fly without this remote link, if you will. You could send them off pre-programmed, they'd do their job and come back so nobody else could hack into them.
Gabriel, what do you think inevitably will be the ultimate upshot of all of this? Do you think this will make its way to Congress? Will there be hearings? Will people want to get to the bottom of how the Pentagon knew that there was this vulnerability and yet continue to operate these drones?
I think in the first place there'll be intense pressure to fix this problem now, to the extent it still remains. But yes, I think if it turns out that the military knew about this flaw for a prolonged period of time and didn't act to address it, that would raise a lot of questions about complacency in the government, and I think Congress would want to have a look, and certainly the public would be concerned about how careful we are being with intelligence systems. And we've had a hard time keeping secrets in this country, and this is a pretty dramatic example of that.
All right, Gabriel Schoenfeld from the Hudson Institute. Nick Robertson, thanks very much. Appreciate you coming in tonight.